Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Unbound. I'm your host, Beth Curry. Last episode was about losing Dad. That 3 a.m. knock on the door. The signs that I missed, Mom spending a day alone with him, not really understanding why he wouldn't wake up. This episode is about what came after that. 6 days after they carried Dad out of the house, we walked Mom out for the last time. Started the process of cleaning out their house. But even earlier than that, the funeral home stuff, like all of these unmistakable signs that Dad was still present, signs I know he sent, letting us know that he was there and we were, still making good decisions when we questioned everything. And it was like he was guiding us through the aftermath of his death. So today's chapter is called Signs Along the Way. In the immediate wake of Dad's death, practical concerns descended with startling speed. The police officer standing in their living room couldn't leave until we had selected a funeral home to collect Dad's body. The surreal nature of this moment, having to make such a consequential decision while still processing the fact he was gone, left us numb and disoriented. Brian chose a funeral home essentially at random, a name that sounded familiar from somewhere, even though none of us could have said exactly why. When we arrived at the funeral home later that day to make arrangements, the director led us into a consultation room. As I entered, a chill ran down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. One section of wall was adorned with Boston Bruins memorabilia. Dad's team, the team he'd cheered for his entire life, through winning seasons and losing streaks, the team whose games he would watch with religious devotion. "Look," I said, "it's Dad." Of all the funeral homes in the area, of all the consultation rooms we could have been assigned, we had somehow ended up in this one. The randomness defied explanation, or rather suggested an explanation beyond rational understanding. It was the first sign that while Dad's physical presence had left us, something of him remained, guiding us through the impossible days ahead. We needed that guidance more than we could have imagined, because while we were overwhelmed with funeral arrangements, estate matters, and our own grief, there was Mom to consider. Mom, who had just lost her husband of 52 years. Mom, whose dementia made her particularly vulnerable to the destabilizing effects of radical change. Mom, who could no longer live alone in the house they had shared. 6 days after they took Dad out of the house for the last time, we walked Mom out for the last time. The symmetry of these departures, first him, then her, less than a week apart, felt both cruel and strangely fitting. Their lives had been so intertwined for over 5 decades that it seemed almost inevitable that when one home chapter ended, the other would immediately follow. Mom was taken in on a crisis basis to Maple Lodge, a care facility in a town about 15 minutes from their house. The crisis placement was a blessing in terms of immediate care. She needed supervision and support that we simply couldn't provide while managing all the other aspects of Dad's death. But it also meant another trauma layered on top of her loss. A new environment, unfamiliar routines, staff she didn't know, a roommate she had never met. For someone with dementia, this kind of upheaval can be catastrophic. Familiar surroundings often provide anchors when memory fails. The comfort of recognizing a favorite chair, knowing which drawer holds the silverware, understanding the rhythm of a household, strip those anchors away and the confusion intensifies, anxiety escalates, and the sense of security that makes daily functioning possible can disintegrate. We had no choice. Dad had been her primary caregiver, managing her medications, preparing her meals, guiding her through daily routines. Without him, the house they had shared was no longer a viable option. Still, the knowledge that we were doing what was necessary didn't ease the guilt of watching her face as we left her at Maple Lodge that first day, confused, frightened, repeatedly asking when she could go home. For the next 6 weeks, we drove out every weekend to visit her, 90 minutes each way, every Saturday or Sunday, sometimes both. These visits were as exhausting as they were essential. The long drives gave us time to process our own grief, to talk about Dad, to remember him without Mom's confused questions about his whereabouts. But they also meant entire days spent traveling and visiting, returning home emotionally drained, only to face another week of work and responsibilities before doing it all again. Parallel to these visits ran another emotionally brutal task, cleaning out their house to prepare it for sale. The first time I walked into their house alone after Dad's death, the silence hit me like a physical force. No smiling faces, no one called out a greeting, no one asked if I wanted coffee. The absence of welcome, that simple human acknowledgement that had always been part of arriving at their home, underscored with a devastating clarity that this house was no longer a home, but just a structure containing objects. Every weekend visiting Mom was also dedicated to sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. Each drawer, each closet, each shelf contained decisions that felt impossible to make. What do you do with Dad's knickknacks? Where does Mom's china go when she'll never set a table again? How do you decide the fate of photo albums, Christmas decorations, the tools in the garage that still carry the imprint of Dad's hands? The process was both physically exhausting and emotionally devastating. Objects that had been background furniture to our family life suddenly became charged with significance, precisely because we had to decide their fate. Keep, donate, sell, discard. Each category represented a different kind of goodbye, a different acknowledgement that the life these objects had served was over. Most painful were the items that held meaning only to our family. Dad's cards he had kept from people. Mom's recipe cards with margin comments. These weren't valuable in any conventional sense, yet they were irreplaceable, tangible connections to the past that now existed only in our memories. After 3 grueling weeks of sorting, donating, discarding, and packing the few things we could keep, I stood in their empty house one final time. The rooms echoed with absence, not just of furniture, but of the life that had animated this space for so many years. The walls that had witnessed Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, ordinary weekend dinners now stood bare, waiting for someone else's story to begin. I walked through each room saying goodbye to the spaces themselves. The kitchen where Mom and I would sit and visit frequently. The living room where Dad had watched countless hockey games or Friends or Judge Judy or Dr. Phil episodes. The backyard where they had bird feeders. Then I stood in the empty foyer, keys in hand, ready for my final departure. I guess that's it, I said to no one. Basement empty. Main floor empty. It's just done. Everything is gone. Literal trash. Trash with immense meaning, but nowhere to go. Driving away that final time broke something in me that I hadn't realized was still intact. It's amazing how much your life can be turned upside down with just one death, I said to myself, still clutching the house keys I no longer needed. The practical necessity of emptying and selling their house had forced a pace of disconnection that my heart wasn't ready for. While the logical part of me understood that Mom would never return there, that maintaining an empty house made no financial sense, the emotional reality of erasing the physical container of so many memories felt like a second loss layered on top of Dad's death. Mom adjusted as well as could be expected, which is to say not particularly well at all. Each visit followed a similar pattern: initial confusion, gradual recognition, a period of relatively normal conversation, and then the inevitable moment when she would ask about Dad. Sometimes we would tell her the truth, watching her face crumple with fresh grief. Other times, when she seemed particularly fragile, we would redirect, saying he was busy or at an appointment, unable to bear witnessing her pain all over again. The cycle would repeat the following week. Her short-term memory loss meant that each time we told her about Dad's death was the first time for her. The shock and sorrow as raw as if she were hearing it for the first time, which, in her experience, she was. This unique cruelty of dementia, having to repeatedly experience the worst news of your life, wore on all of us. We debated whether it was better to keep telling her the truth, allowing her to process the grief each time, or to spare her the repeated trauma by redirecting her questions. There was no right answer, no approach that felt completely ethical or completely wrong. We navigated by instinct and exhaustion, by the look in her eyes on any given day, by our own emotional reserves at any given moment. Just when this grueling routine had begun to feel like our new normal, a sudden opportunity emerged. A placement had opened up in a facility in our town. The relief was enormous. Instead of 3 hours round-trip driving time, we would visit Mom in just 15 minutes. Instead of scheduling entire days around the visits, we could stop by on a weekday evenings or bring her to our home for dinner. The transition to this new facility brought its own challenges, of course. Another new room, new staff, new routines to learn. But being closer meant we could visit more frequently, helping her adjust more quickly, addressing problems as they arose rather than discovering them days later. For about 6 months, it seemed like we had found a sustainable arrangement. Not ideal, but workable. A fragile equilibrium in the aftermath of Dad's death. Then came the announcement. The facility would be closing for demolition and rebuilding. While they promised continued placement for all residents and assured us that nobody would be put on the streets, the news hit hard. Mom would have to move again, adapt to yet another new environment, form connections with new staff, acclimate to a new roommate. Each change, each transition increased the likelihood of what medical professionals call transfer trauma, the marked decline in physical and psychological well-being that often follows relocation for elderly people, particularly those with dementia. We began preparing ourselves for another difficult transition, for helping Mom weather yet another disruptive change in her already fractured world. The stress of anticipating this move, of not knowing exactly when it would happen or where she would go, layered onto our still raw grief over Dad. It seemed that we couldn't catch our breath, couldn't find solid ground before the next challenge emerged. And then something remarkable happened. Something that defies statistical probability and again suggested a hand guiding events from beyond our immediate understanding. Mom was offered a placement at Willow Grove. Not just any facility, but the most requested, highest-rated care home in the entire region. With hundreds of people on the wait list ahead of her, the odds of securing a place there were vanishingly small. But as this was classified as another crisis placement due to the facility closure, she moved to the front of the line. The social worker who called with the news couldn't hide her amazement. Placements at Willow Grove usually took years to secure, not months, and certainly not under these circumstances. When we arrived for the intake tour, the administrator explained that Mom would be placed in their Scenic Woods neighborhood, one of several neighborhoods in the facility, each with its own name and character. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, the hair on my arm suddenly standing on end. "Did you say Scenic Woods?" I asked. The administrator nodded, looking slightly confused by my reaction. "Yes, it's one of our specialized memory care neighborhoods." I knew Dad's hand was all over this. Dad's last round of golf, the final time he had played the game he loved before his health declined too far to continue, had been at Scenic Woods Golf Course. Of all the possible wing names, of all the potential neighborhoods within this facility, Mom was being placed in the one that carried the exact name of the course where Dad had played his final round. Coincidence feels like an inadequate explanation for such precise alignment. The Boston Bruins room at the funeral home might be dismissed as chance, but this second instance, so specific, so personally significant, sent chills through me. It felt unmistakably like Dad was letting us know he was still present, still involved, still looking out for Mom even after his physical departure. These weren't the only signs. Throughout those difficult months of transition, small moments of synchronicity appeared with such frequency that we began to anticipate them. A blue jay, Dad's favorite bird, would appear outside Mom's window or in my backyard when they hadn't before. Rabbits would also gather in my yard every time I looked outside and said, "Dad, I need a sign." A random forget-me-not on concrete when I was having a particularly difficult day. The television in the common room would be on a golf tournament just as we entered the space. Mom would suddenly recall a detailed memory of Dad during an otherwise confused conversation, delivering it with startling clarity before slipping back into general bewilderment. Each incident on its own might be dismissed as coincidence or selective attention, the human mind's tendency to find patterns of meaning in random events. But taken together, their cumulative effect was powerful and undeniable, at least to us who knew him best. These weren't just random occurrences, they were communications, reassurances. Dad's way of letting us know he was still present in some form, still caring for his family, still making his presence known in the ways available to him now. And I was seeing him. Mom adjusted relatively well at Willow Grove, settling into routines more quickly than at previous facilities, seeming more at ease in her surroundings despite her progressive cognitive decline. The staff marveled at how smoothly she transitioned, given the multiple moves she had experienced in such a short time. They couldn't know about the Bruins room or the Scenic Woods connection, those private signs that convinced us Dad was somehow facilitating this process from wherever he now existed. Fortunately, Willow Grove would be Mom's final move. The facility's excellent reputation proved well-earned, with attentive staff, appropriate activities, and a physical environment designed specifically for residents with dementia. While no institutional setting can replace a home created over decades of shared life, Willow Grove provided the next best alternative, a safe, supportive environment where Mom's needs could be met as her condition continued to progress. The months after Dad's death were among the most challenging of my life, managing my own grief while helping Mom navigate hers over and over again, handling the practical aspects of Dad's estate while arranging appropriate care for Mom, maintaining my own family life and work responsibilities while spending hours on the road for visits. Each element alone would have been difficult. Together, they created a perfect storm of emotional and logistical challenges that often left me feeling completely overwhelmed. What sustained me through this period beyond the practical support of Brian and the emotional resilience of crew were these unmistakable signs that Dad remained present in some form, guiding us through the aftermath of his departure. These weren't just comforting coincidences, they were lifelines in a turbulent sea, tangible reminders that we weren't navigating these waters entirely alone. I know how this sounds to those who haven't experienced such moments, like wishful thinking, like the desperate need to find meaning in a meaningless events, like the mind's attempt to create order from chaos. Perhaps there's some truth in those explanations. Grief certainly heightens our awareness, makes us more attuned to potential connections and patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed. But I also know what I experienced. I know the chill that ran through me when we entered that room in the funeral home. I know the electric recognition when the administrator said Scenic Woods. I know the sense of presence that accompanied these moments, not just emotional comfort, but a genuine awareness of something beyond ordinary explanation. Dad never intended to leave us with all of this. The complex care arrangements for Mom, the legal and financial matters that needed resolution, the emotional labor of supporting her through cognitive decline while managing our own grief. He had always been the planner, the organizer, the one who anticipated problems and solved them before they fully materialized. His own declining health had prevented him from creating the comprehensive contingency plans he would have preferred, leaving us to piece together solutions in the aftermath of his unexpected departure. But in those unmistakable signs, I find something essential. The certainty that he saw our efforts, that he recognized challenges we faced, that he remained proud of how we handled everything, even as we stumbled through unfamiliar territory. The confidence that while he couldn't shoulder these burdens directly anymore, he was finding ways to ease our path, to open doors that should have remained closed, to place Mom exactly where she needed to be despite overwhelming odds against such placements. Some might call it magical thinking. Others might frame it in religious terms as divine intervention, or in spiritual language as energetic connection to transcending physical death. The terminology matters less to me than the lived experience. What I know with certainty is this. In the midst of profound loss and overwhelming responsibility, these signs provided exactly what we needed, not just comfort, but practical assistance in the form of extraordinary circumstances that eased Mom's journey and ours. The Bruins room that told us Dad was still present at the very beginning of this process. The Willow Grove placement that seemed impossible until it wasn't. The Scenic Woods assignment that carried his final golfing memory into Mom's new home. These weren't just coincidences. They were coordinates on a map we couldn't fully see, guiding us through territory we never wanted to traverse. They were Dad, still taking care of his family, in the only ways now available to him, still making his presence known when we needed it most, still proud of us as we navigated the aftermath of his physical departure. I see him in these signs, both obvious and subtle, blue jays and bunny rabbits, and in seeing him, I find the strength to continue this journey, to visit Mom every few days, to handle her repeated questions about his whereabouts, to witness her confusion and comfort her grief, to maintain connection even as dementia erodes her understanding of our shared history. Because somewhere, somehow, Dad is watching, Dad is guiding, Dad is proud. And that knowledge, more than anything else, illuminates the difficult path ahead. Let's chat. So it's hard to go back into that stretch of time, not because I haven't thought about it, but because I have a lot. It's one of those experiences that kind of keeps replaying in quieter ways and just kind of changes shape as the years go by. Um, when I think about that drive now, that rush to get there, the anxiety and the exhaustion, I can still feel it, but it's a lot softer. I don't carry that panic anymore. I just carry the gratitude that I made it alive, that I got to be there and I didn't miss those moments, even though I was, terrified that I would. What stands out most to me now is how much I was guided through all of it. At the time, I didn't see it that way. I thought I was just barely hanging on, doing my best to make decisions that felt impossible. But looking back, I do see, that's someone was helping me find my way. And that's, why I wrote about it in this chapter. The timing and the people who showed up and all of the signs that kept kind of nudging me forward, it all lined up in ways that, I couldn't see until later. Do I keep saying, I think I do. Anyway, I think that's what this chapter is really about. Learning to recognize those quieter forms of support. When you're, I said it again, when you're too tired or too scared to ask for them. Whether you believe in signs or something bigger, I believe in both. Or if you just think it's coincidence, I don't believe in coincidences. It doesn't really matter. What matters, I think, is the comfort it brings. The reminder that we're not as alone as we feel we are, maybe in those moments. I used to question whether those signs were real and if they were just things I wanted to believe. But honestly, at this point, I don't care if they're real in some scientific sense. They feel real. They very much feel real as, looking back over the decades and the losses I've had and the signs that I see and get, they bring peace. They remind me love doesn't ever disappear. It just changes form. That's all. And that's very much enough for me. So I have some listener comments here, and I just want to share. They came in after that last episode about losing Dad. This one's from Kate. Beth, I sobbed through your entire chapter about your dad. Aw. My father died suddenly 3 years ago, and I never got to say goodbye either. Thank you for putting words to something I haven't been able to express. That guilt of the last hug you forgot. The last call you didn't make. You're not alone in carrying that. Kate, thank you for sharing that. I am so sorry about your dad. That guilt, the what ifs and the if onlys, they're brutal, aren't they? Like they suck. Hard. What I'm learning is that our last interactions with people we love are, rarely cinematic or profound. They're usually ordinary, like rushing out the door and saying we'll call later, assuming there will always be more time. A weird one I was just thinking about the other day is completely unrelated to death. And that's, I was trying to remember the very last time I ever picked up my son. Like picked him up, lifted him up and held him on my hip or on my lap. Well, I mean, teenagers being silly teenagers, I've held him on my lap recently, but that's, stupid TikTok trends or whatever. But no, thinking about when was the last time I ever really picked him up? And I don't remember that happening. So yeah, ordinary moments, right? That we don't know are the lasts, but they're there. I don't know if that guilt ever fully goes away. I personally try to channel it into being more present with the people I still have, making sure crew knows I love him, telling Brian what he means to me, always trying to remember to say I love you to, the people I love, showing up for Mom when it's hard, Our dads knew that we loved them, even if we didn't say it that last time. I have to believe that, and I think you should too, Kate. So thank you for the comments. Next comment or comment, I think. It comes from Mike. I lost my mom to dementia a few years ago, and reading about your mom spending that day alone with your dad, not understanding, that gutted me. My mom died alone in the care facility during COVID when we couldn't visit. The guilt of that, of her being alone in the end, it's crushing. How do you carry it? Wow, Mike, I am so sorry. The COVID losses, people dying alone because of lockdowns, that's a particular kind of trauma I can't fully understand, but I can only imagine the weight of. How do I carry the guilt of mom being alone with dad that day? Honestly, some days I don't carry it well, but some days, it's okay. Some days it crushes me. What helps is remembering that even through her confusion, she found the strength to check for a pulse and call 911. She took care of dad one last time. That's love persisting, I think. I believe your mom knew that you loved her. The circumstances that kept you away were not your fault. This virus created impossible situations for so many families. And I hope that you don't carry this guilt much longer because you couldn't control that. It was completely beyond your control. And I really feel for people who are in your situation. I can't even imagine at all. It's heartbreaking. So that's where I am now with this, after writing this chapter a year later, still learning from it, still paying attention. It's funny how the things that kind of once broke you can also become the things that ground you, as time passes. If you're going through something similar, the fog of grief, the exhaustion, the uncertainty, I hope that you'll trust you're being led through it, even when it doesn't feel that way. If you feel stuck or whatever. Sometimes the path really does only make sense when you look back. If you have any stories about signs from loved ones who've passed, any comments, questions, like literally anything, I would love to hear them. You can email me at unboundwithbethcurry@gmail.com or join the Facebook group. Would love to start a conversation there. If you want to support the show, all the information is in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.